Alright, today we're doing another JoJo What If. And also, today's another What If a character died instead of another character What If. Today, by reading the title, you could tell what if the lovable waifu Lisa died, and the Jobro with the most tragic death, Caesar, lived. Well, at least we get to prevent that horrible death, but at least we'll see what would happen if Lisa died and Caesar lived, or at least how the rest of part 2 would go. And I will probably talk about 3 and onwards, because this could actually affect the rest of the franchise. And by could, I mean it would most definitely affect the rest of the franchise. But regardless, here we go. The rest of the story, if Caesar lived in Lisa's spot. Before I start the video, I will say I got the idea from one of my older what-ifs, where I did a video where I asked people where a character that depict like one character to live and die and get swapped. There were a few of them that came up, and I'm gonna make some of them into videos, but this is gonna be the first one. I think this one could be the most interesting one, and I could see this one probably having the most interest from people. So I'm gonna do this one first. But I guess enough chit chat. Let's actually talk about the main story. And how would part 2 kind of fully start off? Well, I mean, if we're talking about the what if wise, most of the story is going to go the same until we get to the Wamu fight, where in this timeline, I assume Lisa arrives early enough to see Caesar do the bubble thing. You know, Caesar's almost going to kill Wamu. He goes and he goes to make his mistake like in canon, but Lisa notices and jumps in the way, and she tanks the attack. She uses the last of her power and probably her scarf to pull off the ring, and that's basically how I guess Joseph gets the ring in this timeline. Lisa would probably tell Joseph about how she was his mother and all that, and that whole thing would go the same. Lisa reveals that she was Joseph's mom, and gives him all her hormone, and then he probably gets crushed by the rock. After that, I could see Caesar probably reacting the same way Lisa originally did. Caesar would start off by saying something along the lines of, "She's an idiot for getting." In the original, Lisa was like, "Well, he's an idiot for running into battle." In this timeline, I think Caesar would be more like, "Well, she's an idiot for getting into my business. This wouldn't have happened if she would have gotten herself killed." And then he would start realizing it was his fault because Joseph would probably yell at Caesar saying she tried to protect him. I could be doing Italian and British accents in this whole moment if I wanted to nail in the point, but I'm not going to. And then Caesar would obviously cry. He would realize Lisa died so he can live, and I'd say Joseph would probably scream out Lisa's name. And it'd be very tragic because Joseph would have just found out that was his mom who died. So Lisa is revealed to be Joseph's mom a lot sooner in this timeline, I guess, but it's a lot more depressing because she literally dies in front of him. Now, I guess when it comes to the rest of part 2, I guess Lisa being gone now, this would technically mean it's gotta be Caesar and Joseph who does the rest of the traveling. Well, I'd say when it comes down to it, first would be like the weird Beck fight, but like even then, I think Caesar and Joseph should be able to kill him pretty easily. And they should be able to make it to Korra's castle. Kind of skimming over some stuff most likely, but I don't really remember part 2 too well. Well, in my opinion, next would be, I guess, the scene where Lisa did that whole bet with Cars where one of them would go to fight Wamu and the other one would go to fight Cars. If they declined the deal, then Lisa would destroy the Red Stone. I think Caesar could basically just take that place, or Joseph could. And it seems very in character those two could, so I think we'll say it's Caesar just for the sake of the plot. And he threatens to destroy the Red Stone if Cars doesn't apply to the rules. In my opinion, I think this would most likely mean Joseph has to fight Wamu still, while Caesar goes against Cars. Alternatively, you can make it so that Joseph and Caesar, I guess, work together. If anything, this would probably strengthen their bond since both their parents were killed by Pillarmen in this timeline. So I could actually see them working a lot better together. Granted, I could see some arguing still here and there, but I think Lisa's death would maybe play the role of being the death that kind of causes Joseph and Caesar to stop their arguing and to put it behind them. And I think that would kind of be where Joseph and Caesar can finally say they get along and become bros. Now, I'm going to assume Caesar does go against Cars in this timeline while Joseph goes against Wamu, realistically. Now, the Wamu fight goes the same. that whole thing goes the same. Rip Wamu. Uh, Joseph takes the ring, and it's basically now Caesar's turn. Off the bat, Caesar's definitely not going to rely on weapons, and instead he just uses his bubbles. And in fact, he would actually be able to kill the fake cars a lot quicker because, his range. So fake cars would have died, and by that logic, it would be a lot harder to go after the real cars unless he found a way to get Caesar angry and then just attack him from behind. Now, in my opinion, I actually think Caesar would be able to find out the real cars and would land an attack with his bubble cutters. Kind of like that. Cars would probably still go to attack Caesar, and I do believe this would end up with Caesar getting hurt, but it wouldn't be as bad as Lisa, and Caesar would still be able to continue the fight. I do think this fight would go on a little bit longer, and cars would have definitely been tired out, and I do think eventually Joseph would have come to help Caesar, but once that happened, Joseph would have been too late, and Caesar would have just gone injured by cars. Granted, Caesar could die here in this timeline, and if he does die here, then the rest of the story as a whole goes the same, except it'd be a little more depressing since we would have watched Lisa die earlier on. But assuming we do go the route where Caesar lives, then for most of 2, I feel like regardless, Caesar would get knocked out eventually, but him and Cars would be a lot longer of a fight because Caesar's got a long-range fighting style. So he'd be able to take out the fake cars and could actually get some damage off all the real cars. If anything, confirmed by Wamu, Caesar should be able to kill Cars in this fight. Confirmed by Wamu himself, had Cars win against Caesar, it would have most likely ended with Cars getting killed. So, in other words, there's a chance that we could actually see no Ultimate Lifeform Cars, and they could have just defeated Cars a lot sooner. To be honest, I would like to see Caesar kill one of the Pillarmen, in my opinion, and that's something I do wish got to happen. So, maybe this can happen in this timeline to kind of give Caesar that W, because I always felt like he should have killed someone from the Pillarmen, since his father did die right in front of him. I do think, if anything, if you want an alternative, maybe Caesar can be the one to kill Wamu, and Joseph can still defeat Cars. Joseph still kills AC/DC, and he kind of kills Santana, so I think Caesar should benefit from killing one of the Pillarmen, giving him that kind of W. But, in my honest opinion, I still think Joseph dies against Cars, and then he's revealed to be alive and crashes his own funeral. On a side note, this would probably also be Lisa's funeral, and it'd be pretty depressing. So, it'd kind of just be both Joseph and Lisa's funeral, but then it would just be Lisa's once Joseph's revealed to still be alive. Caesar would probably be sad about the deaths, and he would feel some kind of survivor's guilt from it. But at the end, it's revealed that Joseph's still alive, and Caesar would at least be somewhat happy and relieved to know that his best friend's still alive, I guess. And that would kind of just be it for part 2, honestly. Well, I guess the next question is how would 3, 4, 5, and 6 change? Now, you could theoretically just, exclude Caesar from the rest of the story if you want to go a route where he just pulls a Lisa, or maybe he just dies off screen, maybe he dies in World War II, maybe he dies against Cars, who knows. In my opinion, I would put Caesar in part 3, assuming we go the route where he survives the Cars fight, which I personally would have him survive the Cars fight. Now, this would make a lot of sense for him to be in part 3, because in a way, it would fit the whole, Zeppeli tradition. And in a way, it would also fit the whole, Stone Mask trilogy, since each part would have introduced a new Zeppeli in it. Part 1 would have had Will, part 2 had Caesar, and part 3 would have still been Caesar, but would have also included Caesar's family. In my opinion, Caesar would have had a grandson and granddaughter named Julius and Rose. And if you're wondering, Caesar would have a son, but he would have been killed by Dio a long time ago. Off-screen deaths. And he would have died being stabbed by Dio's arrow, giving Caesar, Julius, and Rose stands, which is what I would personally do here. Now, they would also join the adventure of part 3 in the beginning. Those 3 help Joseph and Avdol and Jotaro, I guess. And I will go through every fight, because I got nothing else to do. So the first arc of the story is obviously the Jotaro stuff. In my opinion, Julius, I would have be a very much hot-headed character, would go after Jotaro first, and this would lead to Julius versus Jotaro instead of Avdol. This is because this really wasn't Avdol's introduction fight. It was more or less just an introduction fight for Jotaro. Avdol was just there, so his real introduction fight would be Polnareff, so this gives Avdol his time to shine there. In this fight, he was just there, so Julius can replace him, and this could actually feel more like a proper fight, where Julius would try to still fight, but Rose would be the more calm and rational sister, despite being the younger one. So she would tell Julius to stop, and this would lead to a little argument, and obviously Joseph would just break it up, or Caesar would break it up. We still get the scene at the cafe, and I think Jotaro would insult Rose, and that would probably just lead to an argument between them. And obviously, off the bat, Jotaro wouldn't get along with the next gen Zappellis here. But I do think Julius and Rose would be sent to go to school with Jotaro to keep an eye on him, where Kakyoin still attacks Jotaro. I do think Julius would be there with Jotaro, and this would lead to Julius actually helping Jotaro fight Kakyoin, but he would more or less get bodied by Kakyoin, and he would more or less just be there to make Kakyoin look really strong, so Jotaro can beat Kakyoin down at the end. After that is Tower of Grey, where I would actually have Rose and Caesar work together with Kakyoin, and I actually would build around a relationship between Rose and Kakyoin, where they would kind of be friends, since in a way, they're the only members of the group who are the youngest, and Kakyoin's the only real polite one, so Rose would actually get along with him. Caesar probably wouldn't trust him, though, because of him working for Dio, and plus he wouldn't want his granddaughter to actually be dating someone, or actually kind of befriend someone like that, so he'd be a little hesitant, in my opinion. Julius is probably Jotaro's new Jobro in this timeline, so Kakyoin and Rose can become friends, I guess. And then after that is the Polnareff stuff, and like I said it earlier, I still think this would lead to Avdol versus Polnareff. And obviously Polnareff still gets his flesh bug removed, and Polnareff still becomes an ally to the Stardust Crusaders. Next are the two fights on the boats, aka Dark Blue Moon and Strength, and I would just say these fights can just go to Jotaro. I don't want to acknowledge these fights because I really wasn't a fan of them, so just keep them on Jotaro, I guess. The other three characters are there. On a side note, you could theoretically add Machina, but I don't know. We don't really know what happened to him after part 2, so I'll pass at the moment. But if you want, I could tell you guys a scenario where Machina is in part 3 in the comments, because I know I have some Machina fans in the comments who do think he would be in 3 and onwards if Caesar did not die in part 2. But I don't feel like he would, since his fate was mostly unknown, so I can't really say I would be confident about that. But I guess back to the story. After the Strength would be, I guess, the Devo arc, where I personally would have this arc probably just go the same, to be honest. I don't really think too much would really change, except I do believe this could lead to a duo fight. I think Julius and Jotaro would bunk together, Rose would bunk with Anne, Joseph and Caesar obviously are going to bunk together, and I guess when it comes to Kakyoin, Avdol, and Polnareff, this is kind of tough. This could still be a Polnareff solo fight, or in theory, this could actually go to a fight with Avdol or Kakyoin. I would probably go for Avdol or Kakyoin, since they really didn't do much in part 3. Polnareff kind of did do a lot, he did get a lot of screen time, so his fights are kind of replaceable. You could also have Julius or Rose take the place, but I personally think they'll just bunk with Jotaro. I just think Julius will bunk with Jotaro, and Rose can just bunk with Anne instead, because they're both the only girls there. But after that would be like Rubber Soul, where I do think that Julius would probably tag along, same with Rose, but I don't think too much of this arc would change, except it'd be funny to see what Rose thinks of her best friend doing the cherry ratto in front of her. Julius would probably just not really trust Kakyoin either, but he probably doesn't care about him too much, so that would kind of be their thing. And obviously everything goes the same. I think this would just still be a Jotaro fight only. Yeah, Jotaro's hogging a lot of fight from the OCs, I know, but I don't really know how to insert them really into fights. But at the moment, this would kind of be their role, to kind of play as the moral support, I guess. After that would be Whole Horse and J-Guile, where I would actually have Caesar tag along with Polnareff and Kakyoin. Avdol still dies against Whole Horse and J-Guile, obviously. And this leads to Caesar helping out and basically playing that role of being the support. This can actually help out a lot because, Caesar and Polnareff both know what it's like to want to avenge people that they care about. If anything, Joseph could actually even tag along too, since in a way he could probably relate more in this timeline now, seeing how Joseph would have wanted that revenge after his mom died in front of him. But I don't really think he would be there. I think it'd just be Caesar, Kakyoin, and Polnareff. And this arc would more or less go the same, but I could see Caesar being a lot more helpful because of his bubble abilities. So in theory, he could use his bubbles to trap J-Guile and Reflections to help out. Now, I guess the next real change would kind of just be, next arc after that would be Nina. Nina. And that arc would go the same. I still think this would just be a Joseph exclusive fight. Next would go to ZZ Top, which I could see Julius helping out, and that's kind of it. Rose maybe can try something out, but I doubt it. Julius would be the one who I think actually helps out a lot. And if you're wondering their stands, Julius would have an electric stand, while Rose would have a water stand, which can also control ice. And also can make it hot. So it's kind of water, but she can change around the temperature to be either super cold to a point where it becomes ice, or super scalding hot. Julius is more or less able to control electricity, and can actually shoot out electric bolts, which would be how I would work their abilities around. Kind of basic, I know, but most of the Part 3 stands were basic, so I think they get a pass. And Caesar's in a way would probably be some kind of bubble-based stand, but I don't think it would be a humanoid, or have a humanoid design. Next arc is Enya, where I would actually have Rose take Jotaro's place. So everything with Polnareff and Whole Horse goes the same. But I actually would have Rose be the one to go against Enya. Since she's the only one who never really got much time to shine at the moment, Julius got to be in the Jotaro and Kakyoin fights, and he's also got to do some other stuff. He had to help out a lot against ZZ Top, I think he would. I think he'd be helpful against ZZ Top. So in a way, this would be a great way to help Rose out, so she can get her own solo W against Enya. But I actually would have Rose use her water and ice abilities to trap away all the souls, and would end up defeating Enya that way. After that, Whole Horse obviously leaves the group, and then we would obviously get the Lovers / Steely Dan arc, which this arc would more or less just go the same, but I could see Rose and Julius helping Kakyoin and Polnareff out. I think Caesar, Julius, and Rose would just go with Joseph, Polnareff, and Kakyoin, leaving Jotaro with Dan, so the Steely Dan beatdown goes the same, which was a really cool beatdown, I may add. The next arc would be the Sun arc, which I actually could see Rose being useful, again, because of the water stuff, but she wouldn't really be able to do too much, probably. Caesar also probably would be useful because of his bubbles and liquid and stuff, so Rose and Caesar could actually have some usage here, but maybe there's some kind of catch where maybe if they're dehydrated, their abilities become less effective, which could be a decent nerf, but they can be helpful for the early half, and then they would obviously, at the end, I could see Julius and Rose probably joining in with Jotaro, Polnareff, and Joseph at laughing at the Rock, while Caesar and Joseph just stand there having PTSD of the Pillarmen. Ha ha ha. The next arc would have been Death 13, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, Death 13. This would still be a Kakyoin fight. You could argue Rose could join Kakyoin in this arc, but I don't think she would. I think this would just be Kakyoin exclusive, so I think she would probably... It would be interesting to see what she thinks of Kakyoin's freak out of the Stan baby, but that's kind of all I could say here. I still think Kakyoin feeds the baby his own poop at the end, so, you know, that's kind of all I could see there. That's kind of it for Death 13. Judgment goes the same. I still think this will be a Polnareff fight. I know I said, Polnareff got a lot of screen time, but in this case, I think this fit to be a Polnareff arc, so this can be Polnareff's own fight still, as in the canon, so that basically goes more or less the same in my opinion. After that whole thing with the Judgment thing, and Avdol still comes back as High Priestess, I don't think too much would change in this arc either. Maybe Julius can try something, but then again, with him being in water, he won't be able to do much in that arc. Caesar and Rose probably wouldn't be able to do much either. I think this arc would more or less just go the same, but with 3 extra characters here, obviously, and I still think they would get stuck in High Priestess's mouth, because at that point they probably would. Next arc would have been Nodal, and obviously Iggy makes his big debut, and honestly, nothing too much would really change. I think they'd probably just get an extra car for some of the Crusaders, I guess. And when it comes down to it, I still think Kakyoin would get blinded in this timeline, but Rose would probably be pretty angry to see Kakyoin get injured. Most likely it would still be because of Polnareff, but it could be because of Julius, which could add more, I guess, to the dynamic of Kakyoin and the Zeppeli family. Or Caesar can be the one who gets Kakyoin injured because Caesar's angry that Kakyoin is always with his granddaughter. This leads to a small argument, and that's how Kakyoin gets his injury, arguably. That, or maybe Julius could be the one who, I guess, argues with Kakyoin. I probably think it'd still be Polnareff, but you could have one of those two take the place to add more drama with Kakyoin and the Zeppeli lineage. And I think Rose would actually stay with Kakyoin while he's healing up. Rose would have gotten a lot of screen time after, I guess, the later half of the first part of the story, before they made it to Egypt, so she doesn't really miss out on much. Julius doesn't do too much, I guess, so he would get more screen time after that, and I would actually have him replace Polnareff in the Oingo Boingo arc. Caesar could also tag along too, so this would be Joseph, Caesar, Jotaro, and Julius doing that arc. And then Julius could probably play the place of Polnareff and toying around with fake Oingo and all that. After that point, I don't really think too much of Part 3 would kind of change, except I could see Julius joining in the Anubis arc with Jotaro and Polnareff, but I don't think too much would really change, and I think that they would probably be able to defeat him a lot faster, or at least defeat Anubis a lot faster and destroy the sword. Having Julius around would probably help out a lot, and I would probably give him some screen time with Jotaro and Polnareff, so he would tag along in a lot of their arcs, I guess. Caesar would also get to, I guess, speaking of Mariah and Alessi, Caesar's obviously tagging along with Joseph and Avdol, and Julius would tag along with Jotaro and Polnareff. Now, Caesar, he's gonna be caught in the whole mess with Mariah, so Joseph Caesar shippers, now's your chance to get your dream come true. Something else I would like to point out is, I should have stated this earlier, I'm really bad at, I guess, explaining things, but I do think Joseph and Caesar would have continued their hormone training. So if anything, since I do believe they would have both continued their hormone training after 3, or after 2, I actually think it would kind of look similar to that one scene of Joseph and Caesar's face together, like in the Part 2 picture, where their faces are very close together. So I guess it would kind of recreate that scene in a way. But I do believe that instead of Avdol, we could get Joseph and Caesar doing that scene, which I personally would find really hilarious. And I don't think Julius would really change much, except I think he would just be with Jotaro. And I think he would use his Hamon to help Jotaro out, because I do think Julius and Rose would have known Hamon as well. So that would kind of be it there. And I guess after that point would be the older Darby arc, which I think would go the same, except I do believe Caesar would also try to gamble. Probably after Polnareff and Joseph lose their souls, but before Jotaro does. So we would get an additional battle with Caesar and older Darby, where Caesar would have obviously lost. He would have had to gamble something away, and that would have ended up everything just going the same for Part 3 there. Jotaro saving the day, which I would probably keep the same, because that was kind of cool. Next would be Whole Horse and Boingo. This also just goes the same. I don't really think there's anything I would really see that would change, except, you know, you have, I guess, Caesar and Julius here, but, like, that's kind of it. Pet Shop also goes the same, because I feel like this would still just be Iggy's fight only. And I guess after that point, we would obviously get the return of Kakyoin, and also would also technically mean the return of Rose. Hooray for those two. So, I guess we do make it to Dio's mansion. And when it comes to Dio's mansion, we obviously get Jotaro being taken away with Joseph and Kakyoin. But I also think Julius and Rose would be gone here. So they are also stuck in the whole thing with younger Darby. That honestly just really doesn't change nothing. They're there for the younger Darby arc, but that's really all I could see that would kind of just change in those arcs. Having that happen, I don't think too much would change. Personally, I would just have Julius lose to younger Darby instead of Kakyoin, because having Kakyoin literally come back just to lose to younger Darby was pointless. If anything, maybe Kakyoin just beats younger Darby, and Julius can be the one who just loses in the beginning, because at least Julius would have gotten his time to shine against Anubis, Alessi, and Oingo and Boingo. So he could technically take an L to younger Darby. I don't think there's nothing for him to lose there. So, yeah, everything with younger Darby goes the same, regardless. And I guess we're now cutting to the mansion stuff. because Caesar would be with Avdol, Iggy, and Polnareff. So I guess when it comes down to this point, I don't think too much would really change in Part 3, or at least until the later half. So obviously we still get Caesar um, just kind of traveling with Avdol, Iggy, and Polnareff. Maybe he's the one who spots Kinigi instead, but I really can't say. And this would be where Avdol does die, because I feel like there's really no way for Caesar to prevent that death. But because of Caesar being a hormone expert, and due to his hormone bubbles and all that, Caesar would be able to prevent Iggy's death, because I actually think he would have been able to figure out Vanilla Ice as a vampire a lot sooner. So Iggy would have survived this timeline. Granted, he'd probably be injured, but at least Caesar would have actually been able to save someone's life here. And I guess when it comes down to it, the rest of the story, I would say the whole thing with the group finding New Kisaka goes the same, but Julius and Rose are just there with Jotaro, Kakyoin, and Joseph. But that's like nothing, I guess, really important to think of there. After that, Polnareff still moves, Caesar still moves, Dio moves Polnareff up and down the steps as he does in the OG. That whole thing goes basically the same. And I guess when it comes down to it, most of 3 would kind of go the same until we get to the final half, where we would get the split up still. Obviously, Polnareff would want to avenge Avdol still, because, you know, Avdol was his bro. So, of course, he's going to run away and try to fight Dio in the middle of the night. In my opinion, this would probably lead to Jotaro and Julius just probably going with Polnareff, and Iggy probably there too. Kakyoin and Rose would go together, and Caesar would have actually went with Joseph in Kakyoin's place. Meaning, basically the rest of the fight would kind of go the same, but instead it would be Caesar taking Kakyoin's place, meaning Caesar would have actually been the one to set up the bubble trap in the place of the 20-meter Emerald Splash. This attack would almost kill Dio, but with time stop, he donuts Caesar, and this would lead to Caesar needing to be the one to reveal the world's power. I know it's kind of cheap to kill off Caesar in this timeline, because this is a timeline where you should live, but I mean, theoretically, you could have him die to cars. That's what I said. There was a chance he could die to cars or die off screen. But personally, for me, I feel like I would have him die here in the place of Kakyoin. In theory, you could have him die in the place of Avdol, which I guess could work, and have Kakyoin still die. But Kakyoin would have just returned from an injury, and plus, I actually think it would benefit more for Caesar to die revealing the world's power, in my opinion. It would have been a far much more useful death for someone like Caesar, or at least someone of Caesar's caliber at this point of the franchise. Obviously, Joseph may just scream Caesar like he does in the canon, and this basically leads to a Hamon Joseph going against Dio, where he'd probably do a little better, but he would still end up dying at the end. But obviously still getting brought back. So Jotaro versus Dio goes mostly the same at this point, but I do believe that after Jotaro plays dead to the knives, Julius would get his own mini fight with Dio, where Julius would almost die and would be the one who almost gets his head cut off, but Polnareff would save him at the end. I could see Rose, Kakyoin, and Iggy getting their own time to shine and trying to help out as well. And this would maybe lead to Jotaro, I guess, breaking his cover a lot sooner. And in my opinion, this would kind of actually lead to not just Jotaro getting to watch Dio die, but also would have led to Julius, Rose, Kakyoin, Polnareff, and Iggy also being there for when Dio does explode to Jotaro's attack. The rest of 3 kind of just goes the same at this point. We would have only lost Avdol the same way he did in the canon, and we would have just had Caesar die in the place of Kakyoin. Jotaro, Joseph, and Polnareff would live like they did in the canon. Iggy would have survived this timeline because the Hamon help. Kakyoin would live because, you know, you have Caesar taking the death place of him, or taking his place and dying. And then Julius and Rose being the new characters who would end up surviving in this timeline. And that would kind of be how Part 3 looks, and holy crap, I took over 20 minutes just to talk about that. Man, I went into much detail. Anyway, let's talk about the future parts, because I do believe those parts are going to change a lot. Well, I guess we can talk about Diamond is Unbreakable / Part 4 of JoJo. I think Kakyoin would be there in the beginning of Part 4. Rose would probably be there. Joseph would get to do more because he probably would have actually trained on his Hamon. Honestly, I don't think too much would really change when you really think about it. I mean, sure, you have Kakyoin, who's a great asset to the team. Rose can probably try to do something Joseph actually gets to at least try to do something. Maybe does Hermit Purple on Kira, but probably would have failed. But regardless, I'd say Diamond is Unbreakable kind of just goes the same when you really think about it. I guess if you're wondering some arc-wise, or at least fights I could see changing, I would probably see Kakyoin being there for the Angelo arc, but I don't think he'd do too much. Maybe just fire out an Emerald Splash, but that's kind of all I could see there. Akira, Kakyoin could be there too, but even then, I don't really see too much really changing there. He can try an Emerald Splash, but that's kind of all I could see him doing. Just an Emerald Splash on Akira, but like, that's really it. He probably just goes with Jotaro in the boat instead, leaving Okuyasu to stay with Josuke and Koichi. And this could actually lead to Okuyasu actually defeating Akira with Josuke. Maybe Okuyasu tries to kill Akira, but then Josuke stops and gives some kind of speech about how you shouldn't kill someone, or or some kind of talk no jutsu crap that Naruto does. But regardless, Okuyasu can actually defeat Red Hot Chili Pepper physically. The hand can actually maybe score a finishing blow and finally beat Akira. After that point, nothing much would, I guess, kind of really change. I'd say Rose can kind of come in after, like, the defeat of Akira, I guess. Nothing much for Diamond is Unbreakable I could really see changing. I mean, I'd probably see Kakyoin being able to be included in some arcs. I don't think he'd be in the Rat arc, but I could see him being in the arc with Remy. Rose can also join into kind of giving Kakyoin and Rose some chance together. Obviously, you still have Rohan and Koichi, who still got to go in this arc. Or you could just exclude Koichi, but I personally would keep him in. The next arc, I guess, I would see changing is the Sheer Heart Attack arc. Now, note for Rose, I could if you want to put her in arc, I think she would be in like the arc with Aya, the Cinderella stuff. I think that would fit a lot for her character, but I don't think she would do too much. Maybe her and Yukiko can interact a bit, which I think could be a pretty interesting interaction, but that's kind of all I could see there. After that point is the Sheer Heart Attack fight, where I think Kakyoin would join along to help out. And by this point, I would state that Kakyoin and Rose would have been married, but none of them would probably die in Part 4. I think both would survive the part. And when it comes to it, I think everything would just go the same with Kira. I think Kira in the Sheer Heart Attack fight would kind of start off the same, but I could see Kakyoin trying something with the Emerald Splash, but it would kind of just not really do much because Sheer Heart Attack's just too powerful. Jotaro would still have to get himself knocked out, and this would kind of just lead to Kakyoin and Koichi having to work together. And obviously Koichi would have still evolved into Echo's Act 3. Everything would go the same, but Kakyoin would actually go against Kira while Koichi holds off Sheer Heart Attack. And this would actually lead to a pretty fun fight between Kira and Kakyoin. I could see Kakyoin's range being really good against Kira and his very much explosive power. And I think at the end we would get some kind of 20-meter Emerald Splash moment, but probably not as much, maybe like a 10-meter version or a 5-meter version. But then Kira touches one of the emeralds and then bam, sets off like a chain reaction, destroying the entire web. And then he would just donut Kakyoin in the place of like Kira, or I mean in the place of Koichi. And that would probably lead to Kakyoin pulling out Kira's wallet and revealing his identity to Koichi. Koichi would probably do that whole "your name is Kira" thing. He'd probably try to make Kira angry, and this would probably cause Kira to just knock him out. And before he would try to touch him into a bomb, obviously Jotaro still saves the day. And we wouldn't really get that dumb scene where Kira has to fix Koichi's sock, because it's kind of dumb that Koichi only lived because his sock was inside out of all things. That felt too dumb and felt like it was too, oh, I live because of sheer luck. I think in this case it would make more sense to have kind of Kakyoin be the reason Koichi lives at the end, because he was able to stall off enough time. But the rest of Part 4 kind of just goes the same. Nothing much would really change, honestly. I guess if you want to talk about Chaos Thursday, Kakyoin in the Enigma fight could be kind of cool. If there's any arcs you could see, I guess, later characters being in, you could tell me in the comments. I think Joseph, I guess if you want to talk about some later stuff in the story, I would like for Joseph to replace Jotaro in the Adam Heartfather arc, basically the fight with Kira's dad, because I do like that idea of Josuke and Joseph working together to defeat Kira's dad. I also think Joseph can take the place of Rohan against the Rock, Paper, Scissors kid, but that's kind of all I could see going on there. That's kind of the only stuff I could see for Joseph. Maybe the Superfly arc too. Maybe have Kakyoin take a Chaotic Thursday fight or some kind of fight during the later half to give him some more shine, I guess. Since I still think Jotaro would get more screen time, Kakyoin can benefit from extra screen time. Same with Rose. And I guess for the final arc, nothing would really change. I mean, obviously Kakyoin's there for the ending half with Kira. I could see him doing something with Hierophant Green, like maybe Kira tries to make an escape, but then bam, the 20-meter emerald splash happens, and that prevents Kira from escaping, so the final half kind of goes the same. Because the entire point of Part 4's ending was like everyone worked together just to defeat Kira, so the ambulance couldn't get its kill. Obviously, Joseph would be in this timeline, so I could see Joseph doing something with Hermit Purple to keep Kira there. Rose, if she's still here at this point, assuming she probably wouldn't leave, because maybe Kakyoin would want her to leave because, you know, Kira's victims are always young women. But if she's there, she can also help keep Kira still, along with Kakyoin and Joseph. But then the rest of Part 4 would kind of just go the same, except we would kind of just have more characters at this point. You know, you'd still have, I guess, the same part, but you'd have Kakyoin and Rose, I guess, like a returning Part 3 character, and another one, I guess, to that point. And also get Joseph, I guess, doing a lot more in the part. I think I'd prefer this version of Part 4, to be honest, because I personally just wish there was at least a few more characters from the past to come back. That's just my opinion. I would have just liked to have seen more characters in JoJo, honestly, return. I know a lot of people like to say it would steal spotlight, but not really. If you can use them right and not give them too much screen time, I think it could work. In the case of Kakyoin, having him return in a part would actually work because he just doesn't do much in Part 3, to be honest. But yeah, that's just my opinion. I think Part 4 would just kind of go the same. I also forgot to mention there'd be no deaths in Part 4, but yeah, that's kind of it. And I'm just gonna go to Part 5 now. So, Part 5. When it comes to Part 5, nothing would kind of change. I mean, you could make the argument that maybe Jotaro would want to send Rose out to Italy because she is Italian, or alternatively, he could want to send Kakyoin out to Italy because, you know, that's his bro. I don't think they would go because, you know, they both probably have a bad experience with Dio. I don't think they would want to meet the son of Dio. So everything in Part 4 would kind of just, I mean, Part 5 would just go the same. I think Jotaro would send Koichi out. Giorno would still steal Koichi's luggage, and that would lead to basically everything in Part 5 at that point, you know. Koichi basically losing his luggage, having to go against Giorno meets Bruno, yada yada. Everything in Part 5 at this point goes the same until the final fight, and that's kind of where everything changes. You notice that I didn't bring Julius or Iggy up in Morio. If you wonder why, it's because they would have joined Polnareff in the final fight. Now, the final fight of Part 4 really wouldn't change too much. The main Part 4 changes would have kind of started to be seen, I would say, around, I guess here, these would be the main Part 5 changes. I'd say not Kakyoin, but Julius and Polnareff would actually get to tag along. And in my opinion, I don't really think too much of the final fight would change. I think Julius might actually make it out of the part alive. Polnareff probably still becomes a turtle, in my opinion. Alternatively, it could maybe end with both of them actually living. Maybe no Chariot Requiem shenanigans in this timeline, and maybe both could make it out alive. But I still think Polnareff's fate goes the same. Julius would actually probably make it out alive, I think. And Iggy, I actually think would die, but I actually think he would use his stand ability to save Narantia. Now, granted, I do believe you can make the argument that maybe Narantia still dies because of fate. But then again, in JoJo, fate's never 100% accurate. I mean, yeah, fate says, oh, this is predetermined to happen, but loopholes can kind of contradict that because of fate always walking on the side of the righteous. Personally, it's kind of obvious Iggy's gonna die, but I would make him die so that Narantia could live, which would give Iggy something useful to do. He wouldn't be there to save Abakio since Abakio was too long gone, and honestly, in the case of Bruno, why save him when he's literally decaying? In the case of Narantia, I think there's more reason for him to live now at that point, with Iggy being a potential character to die for him. At that point, it would fit a lot more and give Iggy, I guess, a better send-off here. I mean, I don't know if it would be better, but it would be a good send-off regardless. Kind of showing that Iggy's finally evolved past his selfishness years later, and he's saving this young kid who has this dream for the future. So Iggy's willing to take the bullet so Narancia could fulfill his dreams. And it'd be somewhat bittersweet when you really think about it like that. Bruno still does a sacrifice, and honestly, nothing would really change. Except we would actually get an additional survivor in Narancia. That would be kind of happy for Narancia and his fans. But that's more or less debatable. I personally would have Narancia live in this timeline. You could kill off Narancia against Diavolo still if you want, and make it so that Iggy and Julius are the survivors. But I personally would just kill off Iggy so Narancia would live. Julius is an additional survivor, unless you want to kill him off additionally. Or alternatively, you can make it Polnareff who dies and Julius and Coco Jumbo. Jarno, Mista, and Trish are basically fated to live no matter what, so that's kind of their thing. And that's kind of all I gotta really say for part 5. I don't really have much to add, except the final fight would be the only part of the story to change. And part 6 would change a lot. So I guess when it comes to part 6, the beginning half with Jolene goes the same. So Jolene still gets framed, and obviously at this point, you kind of know what happens here. You know, Jotaro still loses his disc, Jolene gets stone free, yada yada. But all the stuff would start to change once that happens, when Jolene's in solitary. Because Kakyoin and Rose would have caught wind of it, and they would send their son Tenmei out. Because I would actually give them a kid. I would give him a son kind of to be more interested in here. I also think Joseph would be here since of his hormone training. But I also think Tenmei would have gotten Josuke involved. And if Josuke's involved, I actually think Josuke would have gotten the Morio cast involved. You know, like Okuyasu, Koichi, and Rohan, I guess, can come too. But I think Okuyasu is more or less likely to come. Koichi and Rohan are more or less debatable. But I guess when it comes down to it, I don't think too much of 6 would kind of start off the same. It would all start off the same until those characters would arrive. And that would be where the part actually legit shows its changes. Julius can also show up at this point if he's still alive. And that's kind of more or less if he's still alive. And if Polnareff's maybe even still in his human body, maybe he can just show up too. That depends if they're here. Iggy would have just been dead by part 5. Iggy would have just died in the events of part 5 in my opinion, so it's obvious he can't show up. Only Polnareff and Julius have the chance to show up in my opinion. And I guess when it comes down to it, obviously, in a way, each part kind of introduces its own new generation, you know, from Jonathan to Joseph to Jotaro to Jolene. In a way, it would kind of be the same with Isapelles, you know, from Will to Caesar to Rose/Julius, and then to Tenmei, so kind of passing down that legacy in a way, too. But I guess when it comes to part 6, Tenmei would help out in the Foo Fighters arc, in my opinion. And I think Tenmei's stand would be an axe stand, which I would actually have parallel to Hierophant Green, which I would call Nirvana, because Nirvana's never been referenced, so I'm just throwing Nirvana in. So, I'd say Act 1's ability would be to shoot out emeralds, and this would kind of just be the Foo Fighters arc, and I don't think too much would really change. Mirashan goes the same. I don't really think anyone would get involved here. I think Tenmei can be there with Jolene to meet Weather Report, but I also think that Pucci would send a new assassin to go after Tenmei, and that's where he would awaken Act 2, during that fight. And while that's happening, Jolene would be busy with Weather Report, and they would go against Lang Wrangler. Tenmei would get his own solo fight to awaken Act 2. After that point would be the Savage Garden thing, where we really wouldn't need to have Weather Report rain out frogs. Granted, he still could just rain out frogs, but since Tenmei's here, he would be able to help out Jolene deliver the Savage Garden disc a lot quicker in this timeline, since his stands would be kind of similar to, I guess, Johnny and Koichi's axe stands, where they both start off really small, and then I guess get bigger over time. So in a way, Act 1 for Tenmei, and debatably Act 2, should be able to deliver the disc to Savage Garden, and just fly it over to there. And that would kind of just lead to Part 6 kind of going the same for the first half of the story. But I do think they would get injured somewhere in the story. I think Jolene would have gotten injured somewhere in the story, and same with Tenmei, but that's kind of my opinion. They'd probably still get injured by the guard, maybe, but they would have been able to deliver the disc to Savage Garden a lot faster, so they wouldn't really need to do too much. But I do think they would get injured from their previous fights, so they would have to go to the hospital. After that point, I think Jolene would have been replaced in the fight with Warts Max. Same with Foo Fighters. As for the replacements, I think Josuke and Okuyasu could actually take that place. And same for Koichi, probably. I think it would fit for Okuyasu to do this because him and Hermes could connect to the fact that both of them have to avenge their siblings. So in a way, Okuyasu could probably relate to that pain with Hermes. And Josuke and Koichi obviously there to keep an eye on Okuyasu, and obviously want to keep an eye on Hermes now since she's become an ally at that point. I could see Okuyasu and Hermes getting an interesting relationship, and I would like to see how those two would extend on their relationship, due to them being very similar in personality and being very similar characteristic-wise. Sports Max would go the same for the most part, but Josuke being here would be able to heal Hermes' whole head wound. So Hermes wouldn't be able to miss out action. Well, they're still going to miss out action though, so he's gone for the punishment ward. And obviously the group would need to get to the punishment ward. I don't think Hermes would know how to get there, so that means they would get to meet Anasui still. And that whole thing with Anasui wanting to marry Jolene still happens, and his introduction just kind of goes the same. Planet Waves, I actually do think Tenmei can sneak into the prison, where I think Tenmei would be very much cruel at this point, because I think he would be starting off as a very antagonistic character in the story, but as the story goes on, he would start to become more caring. But at this point, he would kind of just force Jolene to do most of the fighting against Westwood, but at the end, Tenmei would just still kill, and would actually legit kill not DNG, but Westwood, to kind of show how brutal he is. And plus, with the whole thing of Survivor, I think it'd probably lead to Tenmei and Jolene actually arguing, maybe even getting to a legit fight, almost. But then obviously with Kenzo still there, everything kind of goes the same. But I honestly think that in this timeline, since you have more characters here, the Kenzo fight would have definitely been a lot smoother, but I think Kenzo would have probably just taken out Josuke, so Josuke doesn't need to heal Jolene, so Jolene just doesn't really get involved here. Tenmei and Anasui would probably just not want to care about the fight. And I think by this point, it's hard to imagine who would kind of go against Kenzo, or who the main focus would be. I think Joseph vs. Kenzo could be a fun little mini-battle, mainly due to the fact that they're both old men. So kind of seeing what a Hamon Master going against Kenzo's fighting style would be like. His assassination techniques going against Joseph and his Hamon ability. It could lead to some actual fun storylines there. I guess there, kind of thing. But I personally think the fight's going to end the same, so Anasui just takes a W away from Foo Fighters, Joseph, or whoever would have worked the hardest at that point to try to get that W. But FF wouldn't have been as tired out in this timeline and should be able to get to some water. But she would still go against Kenzo for a bit and would still be tired out. But with more characters around, she should be able to get to the water a lot better. And I think she would probably still be sent to the electric chair, but she would definitely be able to heal herself a lot better. I guess when it comes to the rest of the whole punishment ward stuff, I guess the whole thing with the green baby's birth still happens. They still meet survivors, User, and Anasui still turns him into like a weird bear trap thing to DNG so he can cry. And then at that point, Tenmei would have wanted to run away from the group after Yo-Yo Ma comes out, because Tenmei would want nothing to do with the cast. And Josuke would follow him because he wants to talk to his bro like that, because Josuke is that kind of dude. Okuyasu would stay with Hermes and FF, and at that point, I think Koichi might kind of stay with one of them, I guess. I don't know who, granted, but he might. Rohan, hard to say with him, but I think he'd probably just go along with, I guess he'd just be there for the Yo-Yo Ma stuff. Same with Joseph, because Joseph would want to keep an eye on Jolene and Anasui, or at least in particular Anasui, who was trying to hit on Jolene still. But Yo-Yo Ma just kind of just goes the same regardless here. So I think that whole thing with Yo-Yo Ma goes the same, but they'd probably be able to defeat him a lot faster because of, 1, Heaven's Door, and 2, Joseph probably just telling Anasui to stop simping over Jolene and actually get the job done and try to go after the Yo-Yo Ma. But after that point, nothing much for 6 would kind of really change until the Pushi stuff. Obviously, the Green Baby fight basically goes the same. I don't really even... That fight is honestly just filler, so you really don't need that arc to begin with. But I guess when it comes down to, the Whitesnake battles, Hermes would try to go against Pucci instead, so FF and Okuyasu could go after DNG and kill him. And I think this would lead to Hermes getting killed by Pucci here. So in this timeline, Hermes would have died earlier, but I actually think she would put up a fight. So Hermes would actually get a more honorable death than she did in the canon, where she could actually put up some kind of fight and actually die more of a warrior's death, giving Hermes at least some kind of honorable send-off. Granted, you could maybe argue Koichi could maybe 3-freeze and help out Hermes, but I honestly think Hermes can die here in this timeline, giving her her honorable death. Koichi, Okuyasu, and FF can try to look for Hermes, but Pucci would sneak out, and this would lead to Josuke and Tenmei going against Pucci, getting their own mini arc. I think Josuke would get taken out early on, and this would be Tenmei versus Pucci, where Tenmei can evolve into Nirvana Act 3. This would be Act 3 becoming more or less a punchy ghost. Act 1's ability was to shoot out emeralds. Act 2's ability was kind of similar to Hierophant Green's OG ability of being able to unravel itself, I guess. Granted, I know Stone Free can do it, but I think it'd be kind of cool to see two stands that could unravel, and plus parallels Jolene to Tenmei in a way. But Act 3 mostly relies on being a punchy ghost, and also has the ability to touch something, a surface, and whenever its hand leaves that surface, emeralds will just shoot out of that place, which I think would make for some cool ability. Another ability he would have would be to shut out someone's mind for at least 5 seconds. Kind of similar to Jarno's OG ability where he can shut off people's mind. This is to kind of give Tenmei his own unique style, I guess, but the ability takes too much stamina to use, kind of like a time stop, time skip thing. But after that kind of point, Pucci would be able to outsmart Tenmei, and this would end with Pucci almost killing Tenmei, but Josuke would have saved him. Josuke and Pucci would have their own mini-fight, where Pucci would have actually almost killed Josuke, but Josuke would get some kind of last laugh thing, where he does the whole bullet trick that he did against Kira, where he put the blood in the glass, but instead it would be with bullets, and he would hit Pucci and himself. Josuke would almost die, but I think he would make it alive long enough so that FF can get to him. You could have him die here, giving Josuke his own kind of honorable death, but I think he can live, I guess. That's more or less up to you, but I'm gonna assume he lives for the sake of the plot. Now, I guess we get the final bit of the White Snake battles, and I'd say off the bat, I'd say Koichi, Rohan, and Okuyasu can go and hide Tenmei and Josuke's bodies away, and while that's happening, Anasui can still get donut by Pucci. I think not Hermes, but FF would still get hit by Pucci, but with Joseph around, he's able to keep FF alive, so... And plus, FF wouldn't lose the Atro body in this timeline, since Okuyasu would have been, and Koichi would have been there to help out FF in this timeline. So at that point, FF would actually get to make it out of that part of the story alive. Joseph would probably get injured here too, but we would also not get that scene where FF says goodbye to Jolene. Maybe we can get a scene where Hermes' ghost says goodbye to Jolene, but I doubt it. Hermes would have been too long gone at that point, so she wouldn't get a chance to say goodbye. And I think that Tenmei and Jolene would have gotten a scene where they actually get a heart-to-heart instead. To take the place of FF's heart-to-heart with Jolene, it could be Tenmei, where he gets his character development and finally stops being Brood and is able to fully evolve. And this could kind of lead to him and Jolene being friends again, because I think they would have been childhood friends, making it a very interesting JoJo and JoBro duo. Next would be Jailhouse Lock, where I actually believe I would have Joseph take the place in this arc. This would actually be a pretty fun arc for Joseph. Now, like I stated, I think in the Sports Max part, Jolene definitely got a lot of screen time, kind of like Polnareff, so I don't think she benefits being in this arc. If anything, I think Joseph could make more sense here, and plus he really wouldn't have done much in the part at this point. So obviously letting Joseph get us some time to shine against, like, the Mew Mew, that would be some kind of fun stuff there for Joseph to do. And speaking of Joseph, he would also be part of the Bohemian Rhapsody fight, along with Okuyasu, Koichi, Anasui, and Weather Report, who would both still be in this fight. I don't think too much would really change. Rohan maybe finding his own manga would be a fun little, I guess, interaction there, but that's kind of all I could see. I don't think too much of this arc would really change. I think the whole thing with Van Gogh goes the same, and I think Okuyasu would probably just travel along with Weather Report. And I could see Koichi also going there too. Koichi, Okuyasu, and Weather just going together. Rohan probably does his own thing. Same with Anasui, and same with same with Joseph. But that's kind of all I would say there. After that is the Sky High fight, which I think would mostly just go the same. Raquel would actually do pretty good here, and I think he would be able to knock down most of the group, and he would still reveal the group that Pucci and Weather Report are brothers. But Hermes isn't in this timeline, and plus Josuke would have definitely seen Raquel as a more honorable character and could actually see him actually being a good ally to them. So Josuke would heal Rikill, and Rikill would actually get the chance to at least redeem himself. At first, he'd probably be hesitant, but I think at that point he would be more willing to help the group against Pucci and Sports Max, but Pucci and Donatello. And speaking of Donatello, would be like the Underworld arc, where I think FF would play the role of being the reason why everyone lives in this timeline. Tenmei would probably also tag along, and I think he can be saved here too. But nothing much would really change here, except that I think that the whole thing with heavy weather would just kind of go the same. Obviously, there's just more guys there, like Joseph, Koichi, Okuyasu, and Rohan. But that's really it. Granted, Rohan could just undo heavy weather, but I don't think he would until like much later on. Maybe he tries to do it later on, but it'd be too little too late, and Pucci would be able to turn him into a snail. But another side note is maybe if you want to have Weather live, you could have it so that Rohan takes his place. Now, even though I do prefer Weather Report as a character a little more, and I would much rather him live, to be honest, since Rohan definitely has done a lot in the part, I don't want to contradict the Thus Spoke storylines, and since those are canon to my knowledge, it's best Rohan lives so we can still get those storylines, because you obviously need Thus Spoke Rohan Kishibe, so obviously Rohan's gotta live because, you know, the Thus Spoke stories. Alternatively, you could go for that route and have Weather Report live, but I personally would just kind of do that. Unfortunately, Weather's gonna die and Rohan can still live, I guess, which I guess would kind of fit here. Sea Moon mostly goes the same when you really think about it. Obviously, the Sea Moon stuff would go the same, but I think Okuyasu and FF would both die in this arc. Okuyasu to kind of hit hard as that one Morio character to die, because by that logic, I feel like he's the only one from Morio who would die. I mean, killing off a previous JoJo, it's not unlikely, and in Part 6 it would fit, because it's kind of the end of the OG timeline. But I don't really see Josuke making that much sense here in this timeline. Koichi, I guess, but even then I'd say Koichi is more plot armor than like Okuyasu, so I'd say Koichi has a better chance of surviving over someone like Okuyasu, to be honest, so I think Okuyasu would die to Sea Moon, giving him his own kind of sacrificial death, and Koichi can awaken Echo's Act 4, giving him his own kind of cool moment in going against Pucci. I guess Echo's Act 3 versus Sea Moon can be a fun fight, but obviously we'd get Echo's Act 4 versus Sea Moon here. Foo Fighters would also die in this arc, kind of giving them a good send-off too. Maybe this can be the scene where they can say their goodbye to Jolene at the end. Or alternatively, maybe Koichi or Anasui can get injured, and we get a similar scene to how in the canon FF uses the last of their power so that character can live, and they say their goodbyes, and that's the way Jolene kind of decides to awaken the Mobius strip, and that whole thing kind of goes the same, giving FF kind of their death the same way in canon, but just postponing it to like the Sea Moon stuff. The rest of the story more or less just kind of goes the same at this point, but then Jotaro would return, and so would Kakyoin and Rose, and Julius maybe would come back at this point, which I think would be kind of cool. And by that logic, maybe the Golden Wind cast, but I don't think so. I think Rikill would probably try to go against Pucci in the beginning half of Made in Heaven, but Rikill would end up dying, but would use the last of Sky High's power to reveal the ability of time acceleration, which would play a good role and fit a great way to help Rikill get his own kind of meaningful sacrifice. I think he could maybe use Sky High to get to like hit Jotaro's watch or Joseph's watch, because I assume Joseph would probably have a watch, and then that's how they figure out time acceleration, so Rikill is able to reveal that power. After that point, I don't think too much would really change, but once Jotaro does get that whole time stop scene, I think Jotaro would actually be able to move Anasui over to where Josuke is. So before Anasui could even fully die to his wound, he would be able to move him to Josuke. I think this would actually mean Anasui would live in this timeline. I don't think Anasui would be too long gone at this point. A whole point of Crazy Diamond's healing was that it can only really heal people if they had a strong enough will to live, as seen with Koichi and Okuyasu and Jotaro, who were able to hang on long enough so they could be saved. So I actually think by that logic, Anasui should have a strong enough will to live. He did give that whole speech about how he wanted to live, so realistically he should be able to have the willpower to honestly survive getting Donut, especially since he did survive a far more fatal Donut wound in the earlier half of the story. So I think Anasui would have survived and would have been able to save Jotaro with Diver Down. Nothing much would really change for part 6, I guess, except we would get a longer final fight, and at the end I think Joseph would do some kind of sacrifice, knowing how Joseph is. And this would be where Joseph finally kicks the bucket, so Jotaro can stop time and kill Dio. This gives Joseph his own kind of meaningful goodbye, because, at this point we've seen Joseph for a long time. So finally watching Joseph die, after every part he's been in, he's cheated death in some way. Part 2, the scene with cars at the end. Part 3, Jotaro pumped his heart back to life. Part 4, I guess probably the Bite the Dust, or some scene against Kira where he could probably explode. Also, he slit his wrist in Shizuka. So he slit his wrist in the Shizuka arc to help her out. So by that logic, he should be able to live here again too. Then by part 6, at this point, he'd probably have his own moment like that again. Maybe, I don't know when that would happen. Alternatively, maybe there's some kind of near-death experience for Joseph. Maybe instead of it being I guess the Sea Moon half, maybe it could be Joseph who tries to offer his body up to FF, or maybe someone else does. I don't know. But I guess regardless, not FF, but Joseph can get his whole ultimate goodbye, saving the world at the end, which would fit, the entire fate of the universe all being saved, and like Joseph, easily the biggest Joestar at this point. A big deal of a character, someone who's very important, very much important to the franchise as a whole. If we're excluding Jotaro, Joseph's like the second place main character. Him dying at the end is gonna hit like a ton of bricks at that point, because we've seen Joseph for a long time now. So the fact that Joseph's gonna die is gonna be a heartbreaker. And I think at the end of part 6 we can get some kind of funeral scene for Joseph, which I think would be kind of nice to give Joseph a goodbye to the cast. And then we can kind of see the part 6 group kind of go their own separate ways after their survival. At that point, that would kind of be where part 6 ends, and that would kind of be where I guess the story ends, with the universe being saved. So who would have thought that Lisa's survival would have been the reason the universe resetted? I mean, who would have thought? Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe, I guess. Show your support. Thoughts on my OCs, I guess. Enjoy the videos. I guess stay safe. If you're driving, wear your seatbelts. Still got nothing else to say. Have a nice day.